Now, the Georgia Secretary of State's office is facing several federal lawsuits accusing Georgia of suppressing minority voters. Here's one recent claim in a small town outside Atlanta where a grandmother almost went to prison.
I know you before you started.
We go back a long way. We were next door neighbors.
She's not on this year's ballot, but it's easy to see why Olivia Coley-Pearson has served 19 years on Douglas City Council, unopposed.
So we all go way back.
She knows her constituents.
Thank you, sweetie.
While popular in her district, she can be a lightning rod on city council, especially on race issues.
And I tell you, the citizens of Douglas needs to demand your resignation. Sometimes they want you to sit and be quiet and make people think that we have the perfect city. If you're not going to uphold the seats that you're holding, you don't need them. And I'm not liked for that.
Coley-Pearson's toughest political battle happened last year, not on city council.
You committed false swearing.
No, sir.
But in a Coffee County courtroom facing felony charges.
No.
It started with a complaint filed with the Georgia Secretary of State's office. The claim, illegally assisting voters in 2012. Listen to an audio recording between a state investigator and a voter Coley-Pearson helped.
Do you know why Miss Pearson signed the back of the vote certificate that she was assisting you?
Because I didn't know what to do, what I ought to do.
Was that the first time using the machine?
Yeah, that was my first time.
Okay, did she give you any suggestions on who to vote for? At the end there where you have to push the button to cast your ballot, who pushed that?
Me.
And that's what happened. That's what I was criminally charged for in terms of assisting a voter.
Were you on the ballot?
No.
While the Secretary of State's office declined to move forward with the charges,
But there are corrupt politicians who abuse their power.
Coffee County's district attorney did. Coley-Pearson's trial ended with a hung jury. Afterwards, one of the jurors told the Southern Center for Human Rights the only reason Pearson received the not guilty verdict because one of those people got on the jury, later clarifying those people meant blacks.
Really? One of those people got on the jury.
Did you know about this?
No.
Because the jury deadlocked, the DA's office pursued the charges again. This time, the judge moved the trial to a different county. It took the new jury just 20 minutes to find her not guilty, allowing Coley-Pearson to exhale.
It has been so traumatic. Next to losing my son, the most horrible thing I've experienced in my life.
Here we go again.
Reverend Rudolph Porter is a local pastor. He and other black community leaders believe the trial was intended to intimidate minority voters.
Well, if she could have gone to prison for that, I guarantee you could serve all the hot dogs, the hamburgers, the Coca-Colas in the world. People wouldn't have gone to the polls ever again in this county if she would have been found guilty.
They would have been that afraid to go.
Absolutely. In fact, I would have started voting absentee.
Isn't it true that you think everyone who disagrees with you is a racist hater?
The district attorney declined interview requests, but in a letter said the accusation that Mrs. Pearson was somehow targeted or that the prosecution was racially motivated runs completely contrary to the facts. The letter highlighted the race of the other individuals indicted at the same time as Pearson for the same crime. 2 black, 2 white. Pearson was the only one to fight the charges. While voter fraud is rarely prosecuted, claims of voter suppression and intimidation are widespread. Some voting rights groups call Georgia ground zero for the problem.
I believe that Georgia is probably one of the worst states in this country when it comes to protecting the sacred and fundamental right to vote.
Sean Young is an attorney for the American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia. Over the past 2 years, the organization has filed about 19 lawsuits and demand letters to block mass voter purges, attempts to shut down polling locations in minority communities, and prevent what it claims are unnecessary hurdles to register to vote. Many of those actions against the Georgia Secretary of State's office.
And it's this kind of like death by 1,000 cuts approach that these politicians, election officials engage in that undermines faith in our democracy.
Brian Kemp is Georgia's Secretary of State and candidate for governor.
Do you think minority voters in Georgia have legitimate concerns?
No, I do not. Minority voters really should be excited about what's going on in Georgia. Really, all Georgia voters and potential Georgia voters in the future should be excited about the level of accessibility that we now have in the Secretary of State's office that didn't exist before I got there.
Andy, what is Secretary of State Kemp doing to improve access to the vote, to the polls?
Kemp points out to creating online voter registration during his tenure as Secretary of State, and he says it has increased minority voter registration by 23%.
And activists have said that Georgia's strict voting laws play a part in voter suppression. So how do we compare to other states?
Georgia is one of only 3 states in the country which requires proof of citizenship to register. The ACLU says that presents an unnecessary burden for communities of color, which often don't have all the documentation they need.
Prosecution is a travesty. The prosecutors, the Secretary of State, the governor should be called out on what they have done to these women and called to them publicly apologize for the 4 years that they have put them under this scrutiny and this character assassination. So that's how I feel about today. Thank you very much.
June 2016, so summer before the presidential election, that's when we first learned that the Democratic National Committee, Democratic Party, had been hacked. This was the first story that ran about it in the Washington Post, which also helpfully made clear, based on a forensic analysis that was done by a computer security firm, that it appeared that that hack of the Democratic Party was carried out by Russian government hackers. Well before the disaster of Georgia election security in the 2016 election. In his first full year as Secretary of State in 2010, he sent armed agents door to door in black neighborhoods in Brooks County, Georgia. This was after a big get out the vote effort there among black residents. That big get out the vote effort led to the first ever majority African American school board in their town. Local residents said they'd been motivated that year by teacher layoffs in their school district, teacher layoffs that were really unpopular. And according to one local leader of the voter registration effort, quote, "We'd been bit by the Obama bug." This was 2010. "We'd been bit by the Obama bug, and we knew it was time for a change in Brooks County as well." They brought criminal charges against 12 local black residents who'd helped in the Get Out the Vote effort. They brought charges against those 12 residents for things like bringing envelopes containing completed absentee ballots to a mailbox. They criminally charged this group of local residents with more than 100 election law violations, including dozens of felonies. They put them on trial to face more than 1,000 combined years in prison. And you know what? Not a single one of those charges held up. On every single one of those charges, the local resident was either acquitted or the charge had to be dropped by the prosecutors. Not only were there no convictions, there weren't even any plea deals. Acquitted or dropped on every single one. And the Attorney General of the state subsequently had to issue a statement clarifying that actually none of the actions those African-American local residents in Brooks County had been charged with, none of the things they were charged with were actually illegal. Mailing in absentee ballots is not a crime. Registering your neighbors to vote is not a crime. But tell that to the people who Brian Kemp sent his armed agents door to door after in 2010. That's Brian Kemp, Georgia Secretary of State.
It hurts me. My county commissioners, Mr. S.O. Jones, Mr. Joe Wingate, and Mr. Howard Lawson, find nothing wrong with this. They find nothing wrong with this. How much can one community endure to have the right to have our votes cast and counted for who we want to represent us.
Anybody else wants to bring up anything else?
At play. Under Secretary Kemp, more people have lost the right to vote in the state of Georgia. They've been purged, they've been suppressed, and they've been scared. Voter suppression isn't only about blocking the vote. It's also about creating an atmosphere of fear.
No one's being denied the right to vote. The reason they're having these problems is because her canvassers didn't fill the form out correctly.
And despite losing the governorship to Kemp by a margin of just over 1%, a lawsuit filed by Abrams now challenges how elections are conducted in Georgia.
5 months later, do you still feel like your opponent won through voter suppression?
Yes. The idea that minority voters can lose their vote or even face years in prison if those in power want to punish them is precisely what's at stake in the ongoing debate around voter suppression. And heading into the 2020 election, the stakes are higher than ever.
Anybody else wants to bring up anything else?
Was arrested. We thank God for the community that came together. And the first meeting was held at Bethlehem Church. We thank God for Bethel for opening their doors. I was a pastor there. We also like to thank our good friend Floyd Rose. Stand up. God always have people in place when you need them the most. Amen. He is a stalwart in the civil rights movement. He knew what to do. He even named the equipment 10. Amen. He showed us how to get this movement organized. And we thank God for him. He's from the SCLC. Amen. We thank God for them and Tyrone Brooks coming down and helping us. Also, during this movement, the NAACP was started here. And that was to, there might be future cases that might come up, and we'll have an organization in place to make sure we can handle this situation. Now, the United States Constitution guarantees each person equal protection under the law. The United States Constitution guarantees that every person of our nation is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The rights of these citizens were violated. Amen.
Yes, sir.
And what angers me so is the fact that Sister Latasha Head died with these accusations hanging over her head.
Yes, sir. Yes,
and
sir.
Yet there are still, with her, 11 people that still have to be tried. This case has been going on for 4 years.
Sir.
Now, you have to understand one thing, and that is, every person is entitled to a speedy trial. Their rights was violated. Now, why did it take over 4 years to bring these people to justice? It's because they didn't have a case.
Right.
Amen.
That's right.
They didn't have a case. They were hoping that they would take the plea. But when they didn't do that, they had to prove their case. And if you were in the courtroom, you would have seen one of the biggest fiascos you ever wanted to see in your life.
Oh, yeah. That's right. Oh, yes.
The witnesses lied on the stand.
Yes.
The Georgia Bureau of Investigation lied on the stand.
That's right. Yes.
Falsified documents.
That's right. Yes.
The Secretary of State lied on the stand.
Yes.
Boone from the post office, who started this whole mess, lied on the stand,
Yes.
all to try to to make these citizens look guilty.
My Lord.
But thank God that we have a God who sits high.
Yes, sir. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord.
Since we already had the dinner, we already had the music for dinner entertainment, we go to our next section, will be the introduction of the speaker, Miss Gladys T. Lee.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Miss Stacey Abrams, and welcome her to Quitman, Brooks County. Stacey Abrams is a New York Times best-selling author, serial entrepreneur, nonprofit CEO, and political leader. After serving for 11 years in the House of Representatives, 7 years as minority leader in 2018, Abrams became the Democratic nominee for governor of Georgia, when she won more votes than any other Democrat in the state's history. Abrams was the first black woman to become the gubernatorial nominee for a major party in the United States of America. After witnessing the gross mismanagement of the 2018 election by the Secretary of State's office, Abrams launched Fair Fight to ensure every Georgian has a voice in our election system. Over the course of her career, Abrams has founded multiple organizations devoted to voting rights, training, empowering young people of color, and tackling social issues at both the state and national levels, including fair count, to ensure that the 2020 census, the 2020 census is fair. Did you hear me? Is fair, is accurate, and everyone is counted. You mean children too? Every person that's in that house must be counted. Why? Because the monies are appropriated based on the numbers. Stacey is a lifetime member of the Council of Foreign Relations. She is the 2012 recipient of the John F. Kennedy New Frontier Award and a current member of the Board of Directors for the Center for American Progress. Abrams has also written 8 romantic suspense novels under the pen name Selena Montgomery. In addition to Lead from the Outside, formerly Minority Leader, a guidebook on making real change. President. She and her 5 siblings grew up in Gulfport, Mississippi, and were raised in Georgia. I have a small gift that I'm going to give Stacey, and it's Love Blue, and it's an owl, a wise owl. And on the card I've written, Stacey, you are wise beyond your years. Keep climbing. Keep climbing. What God has for you, no devil in there can take it away. Don't forget that. Don't ever forget what God has for you is for you. What God has for me is for me. It was designed from the foundation of the world. Let us welcome Miss Stacey Abrams to Crickman, Brooks County.
Thank you so much for such a generous introduction. Although I think I don't need to speak now. I want to add one piece to my bio. Not only am I a lifetime member of the Council on Foreign Relations, I'm a lifetime member of the NAACP. And before we go any further, it may have been done before, but I try to do this everywhere I go. Please help me thank the servers and staff that made tonight possible. Thank you to Deacon DeShazer for inviting me. Thank you to the NAACP for having me. Thank you to Mayor Nancy Denard for the work that you've done for so long for so many. And thank you to Brooks County NAACP for having me here again. This is not my first visit to Quitman. It's not my first visit to Brooks, and it will not be my last visit. You may have heard I ran for governor a few years ago. And I often have to begin this way because there are some folks on the more conservative side who think I'm confused. I know I am not the governor of Georgia. But I understand why they get upset, because I often end that sentence with, but we won. You see, I grew up in Mississippi with a climate a lot like this. I grew up on the Gulf of Mexico, in Gulfport. I'm the daughter of Robert and Carolyn Abrams, both of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and my father is the child of Wilter and Walter Abrams. My grandparents were Walter and Wilter, who were also called Bill and Jim. I was confused a lot as a child. When I was in the midst of my election, I went home to Mississippi in September before the November election. My grandmother, who was in her 90s, was living with my parents. She had lost my grandfather in 2011, and over time she lost both of her sisters, and she was just tired. My grandmother moved in with my parents a few years back, and they gave her their master suite because it had an in-room bathroom, and she needed that privacy, that respect. And so my parents moved into the smaller room down the hall. And when family would come to Mississippi to visit my grandmother, my dad is the third of 5 children, they would come to see my grandmother, and there was a routine. You come in the house, you say hi to my parents just as a courtesy, and you go down the hall to grandma's room. She had a recliner that she sat in most of the day, and it sat right next to her bed. So you come inside, you come in quietly, and you sit on the bed until she is done yelling at MSNBC, whatever she's mad about that moment. and then she would acknowledge you when you would talk. She would put it on mute. She never turned it off because she wanted to be ready for when the man in the White House did something that made her mad. And so in September, in the midst of the heated election of 2018, after the revelation that Brian Kemp had 53,000 registrations on hold, that he had purged 570,000 people in a single day, weeks before he put his name in the hat to run for governor, that he had overseen the closure of 214 precincts, including an attempt to shut down precincts in Randolph County, the news was suddenly paying attention to this election here in Georgia. And so I sat down next to my grandmother, and I was tired. I'd been on a statewide tour for the third or fourth time. I went to all 159 counties. I'm fairly certain I bought property in many of them. And I was exhausted, but it was that pleasant exhaustion that comes when you know you're doing something you were called to do. But I was tired. And my grandmother told me. She said, "Baby, you look tired. Are you sleeping?" I said, "No, I'm not." And she said, "You know, you'd sleep better if you had somebody with you." I'm like, "Grandma, I'm not married. I'm sorry. I'll work on that next." It was often I had to dance fast to get out of that conversation. And then she asked me how the election was going. And I told her, we were getting record crowds. We had turned in millions of people who'd received absentee ballots. We had more turned in than any Democratic candidate in the history of Georgia. We knew that we were doing well on our metrics. We had the only statewide election protection apparatus in the country. We had more volunteers. We had more people. We were excited. But my soul wasn't settled because I live in Georgia. Because 2018 wasn't the first time I had tangled with Brian Kemp. I met the other side of Brian Kemp in 2014, but I knew who he was in 2010 when he sent his minions down to quit me. And so I knew as much as we were doing for this election that my opponent was doing something, but that he had the power of office behind him. He had the capacity to manipulate the outcome at his fingertips, and I had no ability to force him out because he was the sitting Secretary of State, and the Constitution told him he could do it. I told my grandmother I was worried, but not enough to express that to my team, just enough to keep me going in the mornings and to make me a little unsettled at night. My grandmother squeezed my hand. She said, "Baby, do you believe?" I said, "Grandma, I do." I said, "You know I don't like talking to people. And so if I'm going to run around this country and this state talking to people, it's because I believe it's something I need to do." And she said, "I remember the first time I voted." My grandmother didn't talk a lot about the civil rights movement. Usually she left that to my grandfather and my dad and her children. But my grandmother squeezed my hand and she said, "The first election I was eligible to vote for was 1968. The first presidential election after the Voting Rights Act of 1965. You see, people forget that the 15th Amendment did not grant my grandmother the right to vote. It granted it to black men. The 19th Amendment didn't see my grandmother. It granted it to white women. It wasn't until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that the country finally saw my grandmother as worthy of this basic premise of democracy, the right to vote. And so in a year where we celebrate the suffragette movement, when we celebrate the granting of the right to vote to women, we have to always remember it came with an asterisk, like so much of our civil rights history. And so in 1968, that was her first real chance to vote, but she remembered what led to it. Because her mother, my great-grandmother Mumu, had grown up as a sharecropper, and a sharecropper's daughter, and a slave's granddaughter. She remembered the history that she'd been told about what came to be that would allow her in 1968 to finally cast a vote, but she also remembered what her children had endured. You see, my father was 14 years old, or 15, when he was arrested for the first time helping register people to vote in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He gets younger and younger depending on when he's telling the story. But the message is clear. My father was out there fighting for a right that he wouldn't be old enough to exercise for nearly a decade. Across town, my mother, who he had not yet met, was doing the same work. She was just smart enough not to get caught. But they were fighting for a right to vote because they understood in the marrow of their bones that democracy wasn't real if you could not speak. That when we fight, we win. And so my mother and my father, his brothers and sisters, young people across the state of Mississippi and older people had put themselves together to the test and the strength of what our country said it wanted to be, and they were fighting for the right to vote, and it worked. In 1968, my grandmother had the right to vote, but she tells me the story squeezing my hand because she was reminding me of another bed that she had sat on. Because you see, on the day they were going to vote, after work, when my grandmother and my grandfather came home from the University of Southern Mississippi, where they both worked as cooks for 40 years. They were cooks at a college their children couldn't attend. And they toiled in obscurity serving those who would never see them, which is why I always acknowledge the serving staff. People who prepared the food and delivered it to us, and the cleanup after us. That's why I want to make sure we say thank you. Well, she was sitting there on the bed because my grandfather was in the front room with his brother LP, and they were getting ready. They'd come home from work. They were changing clothes, because this is back when you would put on a suit and tie to go vote. You'd put on your Sunday best. And she was supposed to be in the back getting dressed. And she told me she was sitting on the bed, trembling and afraid. And she hears my grandfather's voice saying, "Wilter, it's time to go." And she doesn't say anything. And he yells, "Bill, come on, it's time to go." And my grandmother says, "Hold on." And he calls out, "Sugar honey, it's time to go." Now that means he's both excited and upset that she's not responding. Yet another name for my grandmother. And then he yells, "Sugar honey, what's wrong?" And he comes back to the room where she's sitting on the bed, half dressed and afraid. And he says, "What is it?" And she said, "I don't want to go." And my grandfather, who's this bantam of a man, this tiny but powerful figure who boxed in the Navy, he said, "What do you mean you don't want to go?" And she said, I don't want to face the dogs or the billy clubs or the hoses." She said, "Those are gone. We've got the right to vote. We get to go vote for president." And she said, "I don't believe it. I don't want to go." And then he started to get mad. He said, "We went and got our children out of jail for this. We fought for this. Why are you afraid of this?" And she said, "I couldn't articulate it at the time, but what she was telling him, what she was telling me, was that she was afraid of power. Because ultimately that's what the right to vote was. That's what had been denied her for so long. And in the moment where it was most possible, she was afraid to take it. Afraid maybe it was a trick, afraid maybe it was a ploy, or more importantly, afraid maybe it was real. But eventually she screwed her courage up, and she got up and went with my grandfather and my uncle, and they voted. And my grandmother never missed another election. But when she told me that story, as she gripped my hand in her frail hand, I could feel that thin, papery skin, those delicate bones, and I could think of nothing more than the fear of power that permeates our nation, that supplants opportunity for so many of our people. You see, we're not afraid to vote, we're afraid of the power. Because so often when we reach for power, it gets snatched from us and we get scalded by its heat. We get beaten back by its protectors. We are told we should not want power because power is not ours. And the reason I declare I won in 2018 is not that I got elected as governor, it's that I helped change the face of the state and I helped more people have their power, and that is a victory. That is our victory. You see, I grew up understanding that if I measured my success by other people's standards, I would never get anywhere. If I measured my progress by the false starts and the high bars that they intended me to never touch, I would never get off my seat. And so I decided early on I was going to decide my own measures of victory. Just because I didn't get what you wanted doesn't mean I didn't get what I needed. And that, I tell you, is the core of the NAACP, an organization whose mission has never been perfection. It has been pursuit. Because when perfection is your goal, you are destined to fail. But when pursuit is your mission, you win every time you move. And no one knows it better than Quitman, Georgia, where a black woman dared to say that there should be voices on the school board that look like the children in the classrooms. Who tried time and again and didn't succeed, but never let it convince her that she shouldn't try again. And when she got there, she did something that we so often forget when it comes to power. That once you get it, you make it stronger when you share it. And so Nancy Denard took that PhD that she'd earned and those literacy lessons that she'd gotten in schools, and she decided to read the rules, and she called and got information from a state government that in 2005 had decided they were going to make it easier for the people they liked, because they never expected anyone else to try to use the power. And she found out how to use absentee ballots, how to reach out to those who had to work 2 hours away and could not get time off of work, even if the law said so, because they couldn't afford to lose their pay. The folks who didn't want to go into the precinct because they didn't know who was watching them go inside. And she decided that she was going to use this mechanism, this power, to change what the face of leadership looked like on the school board. And she got a group of friends, I think there are 10 of y'all. And a couple more got added. I'm not sure they wanted to be a part of the number, but they did the work and they won that election. But victory doesn't mean you win. Because even as they took their seats, someone was coming to take their freedom. Someone was coming to take their reputations. And someone was coming to tell them this power is not yours. But I'm here in Quitman because I know they knew better. That Lou was smart, even as they threatened her and nearly made her question her life, she was unwilling to give up. That those who needed to help their family members cast their ballots, they knew what the law said and they knew they didn't break that law. And over yonder in Atlanta, there was a cartoon villain who was just getting started. Someone who got a little taste of power and decided not only to let it go to his head, but decided to let it blacken his heart. Because when he sent the G.B.R. to Quitman, Georgia, he was here to take your power away. But I'm here tonight because you said no. Because you know that when we fight, we win. Like those civil rights leaders that didn't call themselves that in the 1800s. They just called themselves former slaves who had the right to be heard. They're like the civil rights leaders that are fighting for black lives to let people know they matter. They may not use the same appellation, but they have the same mission. Because the power of our democracy is the power to be heard and to make your government work for you, not on you. And so what the Quitman 10+2 did was they fought back. They got those seats, and when they tried to take it through a fake election, they got them a second time. When they arrested them and stole their futures from them, they reached up and stole those futures back. And Nancy had the audacity to decide she was just going to be in charge of the whole city. Because when we fight, we win. I ran an election, a campaign that was unlike anything Georgia had seen before, in part because there had never been anyone like me before. And that's not a compliment to myself. I'm a sturdy black woman with natural hair, a dark hue of skin, and I decided I could be in charge. I decided that I could speak up for people who'd been too long told they needed to be silent. I had the audacity to be a woman in the bargain. In a nation that has never seen fit to let a single black woman ever stand at the helm of a state. And this matters because we know that the power closest to the people is the power that matters most. We can talk about the presidency and the vice presidency all we want, but I want to know who's in charge of our school board, who's in charge of our city, who's the governor, who's the state legislator. I want to know who the county commissioners are who are deciding how they're going to allocate funds as we face crises across our state. And the reality is I ran for governor because I believe in the power of a governor. Because we forget that the issue of mass incarceration didn't begin with the 1994 crime bill. Mass incarceration started with Governor Ronald Reagan in the 1970s in California. We didn't lose the social safety net because of Bill Clinton in 1996. It started going away when Tommy Thompson became the governor of Wisconsin and started experimenting on poor people. Stand Your Ground has never had a single federal law. That law started down in Florida under Governor Jeb Bush. And everyone in this room knows that Jim Crow never had a single federal law. It was governors across the South who decided to strip blacks of their rights. I ran for governor because I believed that I could use that platform to remind millions of Georgians of their power. People who sat silent as their lives got harder and harder, as opportunity got further and further away. And the fact that I don't hold the title of governor never exempted me from the obligation to try. And in our campaign, we centered communities of color. We talked to black people and the Latinos. We went to mosques and to temples. I talked to the Asian Pacific Islander community. I became the first statewide candidate to march in the Gay Pride Parade. I went to Dragon Con and won Music Fest. I went to the So-So Def concert and to where they filmed Deliverance. I went all over Georgia because I was running for Georgia. And in the process, we proved something. We tripled Latino turnout for Democrats in the state of Georgia in 2018. We tripled Asian Pacific Islander turnout in Georgia in 2018. We increased youth participation rates by 139%. We increased black participation by 40%, which doesn't sound as exciting until I put it this way. In 2014, 1.1 million Democrats voted for governor. 1.1 million total. In 2018, 1.2 million black people voted for me. Because when we decided to talk to everyone, we went from 1.1 million people voting to 1.9 million people showing up in a midterm election in Georgia. But if you do the math in your head, you know that if I tripled those numbers and added those numbers, there's still something missing, and that's because I increased the white share of the Democratic vote in the state of Georgia for the first time in 30 years. I point that out because as I look around this room, I see the coalition that came together in 2018, not necessarily for me, but for Georgia. And down here in Quitman, in Berks County, that coalition is what changes the future every day for the young people who live here, for the folks who look to you for leadership. That coalition that is not bounded by race, but is bounded together by a common power, a belief that if you work together, you can change the future. When they get mad at me for saying we won, I say we won because we changed the future of Georgia. They may not have let me have the seat, but they can't shut me up and sit me down. And so I'm here tonight not only to tell you a history you know, but to give you a charge that you have to keep. You see, my parents began my mom was a librarian and my dad was a shipyard worker, but we moved from Mississippi to Georgia when I was 15 because they decided to go for permanent poverty and became United Methodist ministers. So they brought us here to Georgia. They got their master's degree in divinity. They went back to Mississippi to serve. They actually came back recently because they're raising my niece. She's 13 years old, and she's got a father who is my younger brother, the youngest of my brothers. And Walter's a brilliant and kind man who struggles with drug addiction, who struggles with bipolar disorder, who's in and out of prison. And because of him, I will never stop fighting for criminal justice reform in the state of Georgia and across the South. Because of him, I will fight for felony disenfranchisement to be erased from the narrative of America Because as long as it exists, as long as my brother is in the South, he will never get to vote for me for any election. And we saw what happened down in Florida, just miles away, where 1.4 million people saw their power restored only to see it snatched away again. And the reality is, that position isn't permanent. Because no matter what your race or your ideology, there are more of us who want good than there are of them who will serve evil. There are more of us who want progress than there are those who want to return to days where most of us have to be silent. But the thing of it is, we can't wait for Election Day to start doing our work. In the 10-day period between Election Day and my non-concession day, which is how I describe that day, I had a little bit of time to think. I went through the stages of grief. I went through the denial and the sadness. I spent a lot of time in anger. Anger felt really good. And then I got to the end and I realized I was missing a step. So I added one. I call it plotting. You see, when you finish with grief, you're supposed to move on, but I don't know how to move on without moving forward. And so I started plotting about what I could do, because I realized that if the man who was my opponent got to be the scorekeeper, the referee, and the contestant, it was unlikely that I was going to be the victor. And so I acknowledged that he had the sufficient number of votes according to the law, but I refuse to concede that the law is right, and I will not legitimate a system that steals the voices of its people. And so I did not concede. But I started 2 organizations during that 10-day period. I had a lot of time off. Fair Count is an organization committed to ensuring that in the state of Georgia and around the country, we have a fair and accurate census. I heard a conversation about it as I was coming in, and here's why the census matters. I think she did an extraordinary job, but let me tell you in Georgia dollars. If black men are undercounted at the number that they expect, they just think this is what's going to happen. This is what they think of black men. If black men are undercounted at the level they expect, it will cost Georgia $156 million a year. Enough to pay for Medicaid expansion every single year for a decade. $1.5 billion lost. If the total black community, black women and black children are undercounted at the level they expect, it's another $125 to $130 million. It's $300 million lost to communities like Quitman, to the schools, to the roads, to the hospitals. 316 programs that make our lives better, but the money never makes it here. It's like there's a sieve, and as they try to bring the money south, it just drips away. So by the time it gets here, there's nothing left but a remnant of wet. And this happens year after year after year because rural communities are hard to count. Black communities are hard to count. And you put rural and black together and you are invisible unless we do our work to make sure you are seen. That's why Fair Count has put in place in 150 communities Wi-Fi. Because for the first time in American history, 80% of the census is going to be done online. Now, I lose a cell signal going from outside to inside. And the reality is that's a problem. Because if you're expected to fill out your census online, but you cannot get online, they intend not to count you. This isn't an accident. They've known about this for a decade. But when we fight, what happens? So if we fight to be heard, then on March 12th, when they send out those first letters with that Q code that tells you how to fill out your census, you're not only going to find a computer, you're going to go find your friends and get them to fill it out. You're going to find those folks who are afraid of the census. Because you're going to tell them, look, what are you afraid of? If you're afraid they're going to find you, if you've got a cell phone or a light bill, they already know where you are. Your job is to get your money. When they tell you that it's a citizenship question, there isn't one. That was an attempt to scare people out of filling out the census. And if they tell you, well, it doesn't matter, I've never done it before, ask them if they like what's happened because they didn't do it. Because this is our money, and the thing is, the money doesn't disappear. The reason I describe it as a sieve is that the places that answer the census, their water runs deeper. And all of your money disappears before it gets to you, and the places that are doing well do better. And the places that are suffering suffer a little bit more. But it's also about political power. It's about how they draw those school board lines, how they draw those city council lines. If we do not complete the census, Georgia is one of 4 states that does not have a protection that says that they can't just erase some of us from the conversation. Because you see, the Supreme Court has said that partisan gerrymandering is okay. But the only thing that prevents it from happening in Georgia is racial gerrymandering. There are a whole lot of us. We have one of the fastest growing populations of people of color in the nation. We will be a majority-minority state by the end of this decade. But we will be a powerless majority if we do not get counted in the census. And so while you clap, I need you to go online to faircount.org. I need you to sign up to help make sure people get counted. This mission is not just about you, it is about the future of this community, it's about the future of this county, it's about the future of our state. If we fight, we win, but we don't win if we give up the fight before we even get on the battlefield. So you're going to help me go to faircount.org, say faircount.org. Faircount.org. So that's the first thing I started. I also started this thing called Fair Fight. I told you I had some time. Fair Fight is designed in the state of Georgia under Fair Fight Action. We are doing the work of suing the state of Georgia because you said, I told you, I didn't like the rules. I had to play by them, but that didn't mean I couldn't change them. And so we have filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit against the state of Georgia. They've tried to get thrown out and the judge said no. And we're going to be in court until we get what we need. In fact, because of our fight, because we refused to sit down, when they attempted to purge 309,000 Georgians from the rolls in December, we were able to call 100,000 people and get 4,500 people put back on the rolls. Down here, you guys had Deacon DeSazier. They tried to take him off the rolls, not realizing that they'd mistaken him for his son. And he's on the board. Now imagine if you didn't have his power. Imagine if you didn't know the rules. Imagine if they just told you you were going to be erased from the story of Georgia and you didn't know you could fight back. Well, Fair Fight exists to help you fight back. You see, they've never had a well-funded opponent before. And as they decided I couldn't have a job, I got plenty of time on my hands. And what we did was not only fight to get those 4,500 people notified, we sued them, and the day of our hearing, the Secretary of State admitted he made 22,000 errors. I don't know of any job where you can make 22,000 mistakes in a single day and keep your job. But we have to understand the fight's not over. Because they're going to come back again and again because 600,000 people have registered to vote in the state of Georgia since November 2018, and they are disproportionately people of color and young people, and they know that doesn't bode well for what they want in the state of Georgia. So the purges are going to get harder. It's going to get harder to get on the rolls. It's going to be harder to find a place to go and vote. And I promise you the next thing they're going to do is come after absentee ballots again. We know that because Democrats outvoted Republicans on absentee ballots for the first time in Georgia history in 2018 by 53,000 votes. Now, the NAACP is a nonpartisan organization. I do not have that problem. And so for anyone reporting, I recognize that this is not a partisan event. I'm simply using my experience as an example. But we know that when absentee ballots start rolling around, when it comes time to use them again, we know they're going to be paying attention here. Because voter suppression isn't simply blocking you from getting to the ballot. It's convincing you it's not even worth trying. It's can you register and stay on the rolls? Can you cast a ballot, and does your ballot get counted? And as that program says, If you cast an absentee ballot, you can get counted and recounted. You all are experts at the absentee ballot. Don't let your experience go to waste. And don't let them frighten you out of fighting. Because now you have a friend in Georgia who is going to fight beside you for a fair fight. That's what we're going to do. But we need your help there too. March 2nd is the first day of early voting for the presidential primary. March 2nd is also the very first day that we start using these newfangled machines they've purchased at the single highest price paid for machines in the world. No other purchase of this size has been made in the world. Now, I don't wish for anyone's failure, but they have not given me a great deal of confidence in their success. So we need people who are volunteering to help us watch what happens. We need 6 folks in South Georgia who will stand up and be counted and will help us make sure everyone else gets seen. And so I'm going to ask you to reach out to Marissa, M-A-R-I-S-A, at Fair Fight Action. Say Marissa, at fairfightaction.com. And I need at least 6 of you to respond. Actually, I need 20 of you to respond, because 6 of you are going to forget you said it. And 10 more are going to realize you had something else to do. But you all understand how important it is that we protect the right to vote, unlike any other community in our state. But you're not alone. Because in Hancock County in 2015, when too many black men had the temerity to vote in 2014, Brian Kemp and Barry Fleming, a state legislator and the county attorney, had the sheriff's department deployed to follow black men home on the streets and go to their jobs. 180 black men who were threatened. They said they were being challenged, but they made them prove that they had the right to vote. They went to their homes. One man was followed down the street in an area in a county where black men are 3 times more likely to be arrested. And it was so effective, this terrifying of these black men, that they started calling the Board of Elections deacon and asking to be taken off the rolls so the sheriffs wouldn't come to their houses. That was under Brian Kemp. And so we need people watching, because he didn't get punished for his behavior, he got promoted. But that promotion is only as good as we let it be. I don't want him to fail. I want our state to be successful. But his hand-picked henchmen and his successors cannot be allowed to continue his terrible legacy. We have to watch the watchers. And so I need you not to just amen here. I need you to show up. You're going to email Marissa. Good job. We have to have a fair fight, and we have to have a fair count. Because as my grandmother explained to me, the power is ours. And we've been too long waiting to hold it. They've put obstacles in our way. They have electrified the fences. They have shaken the ground. But worse, they have shaken our faith. I don't believe in voter apathy. Most people who don't vote, it's not apathy, it's despair. When you've lived in poverty, when you've seen family member after family member incarcerated and thrown away, when you've seen sickness turn into disease and disease turn into death, then you may not trust a politician's words. And I'm not asking people to trust a politician, I'm asking us to trust ourselves. And NAACP, what you do every day is you stand in the shoes of those who have given up standing. You walk the miles for those who are too weak to move. And you fight the fights that need fighting, because we need warriors on the battlefield. Because I may not be the governor of Georgia, but I'm the best loser I've ever seen. And here in Quitman, you have a legacy to hold up. In Brooks County, where you all had one of the highest rates of provisional ballots rejected, and you've got work to do. But it's work we know how to do. It's work we're ready to do. It's work we must do, because the future is ours. The power is ours. And when we fight, we win. Thank you so much.
Oh, don't stop. Keep it going. Keep it going. Keep it going, Ms. Abrams. Outstanding.
Okay, David. Also, thank you, David Munch, for being our MC tonight.
I hope you guys enjoyed your evening this evening. It's been great. You got a lot of knowledge. So you take that passion that Ms. Abrams gave you, go out, encourage your friends to vote, your neighbors to vote, your family members to vote, and you vote. It's important. So we're going to have benediction by Matchett, Reverend Matchett.
Let's give Honorable Stacey Abrams another hand clap of praise. Amen. God bless her. Amen. Amen. I tell you, that was a touching speech. Amen. Amen. For the benediction. Now let us please stand. The one who can't stand. I know this is a congested area, but if you feel like standing, let us please stand. Won't take us long. Father, in Jesus' name, Father, in Jesus' name, Lord, help us, in Jesus' name, oh, help us in Jesus' name, help us in Jesus' name, Lord, help us in Jesus' name. And may the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with us all. Everybody say, Amen. Good night.
What's your name?
Lee.
All right, all right. What event is this?
We are having a wonderful event to remember the Putting 10 plus 2 anniversary. This is their 10-year anniversary, and our keynote speaker was Stacey Abrams from Atlanta, Georgia. Of course, you know, she was our candidate for governor. She won, but right now she is not in that position, but we do know that God is in charge of everything.
Okay, and last night, tonight,
yes.
Tonight, I watched a lady introduce her, and I've been trying to find her because she just turned the house out tonight. Can you have anything to say about that lady if you know her?
Well, I introduced Miss Stacey Abrams because it was so easy. I believe in her so profoundly, and the fact that I know she has been chosen for such a time as this. I know that. So it doesn't matter how much finagling goes on in the state of Georgia. When it is time for Stacey to rise to the preeminence that she's been called to rise to, it will happen. That's why I have I mentioned that I have the little blue owl, the wise owl. And on the back of the card, I wrote, Stacey, you are wise beyond your years. Keep climbing. Keep climbing.
Gladys, as I close,
yes.
Were you impressed by the news media and TV stations that were here tonight to record this historic event?
We had no coverage from our local newspaper, the Portland Free Press. I'm sure they're having a lovely event, the Chamber of Commerce or something, but you can send a writer, you can send a representative from the local newspaper, because this is newsworthy to have Stacey Abrams as the keynote speaker here in Clinton, Georgia, and no coverage except for the ghetto free press, but Mr. Jordan. Right.
And don't you remember that when Lula Smart went through her third trial, that for 19 days, no news media showed up. And when she won, came back a not guilty verdict, they called in TV stations, but they never came to the courthouse. It's like as if though the historic record would be lost unless we do it ourselves.
That's correct. That is correct. The only way the news is going to ever be told is that we have to tell it. And we can't tell it if we are here to witness it.
Thank you very much, Gladys. You are a champion, you're an outstanding educator, and you are still educating us. Thank you for all the hard work you've done.
Thank you.
Your life definitely will speak for you.
Thank you.
Peace. It is speaking for you. Thank you so much. And I thank you for being willing to do interviews. A lot of people won't do interviews. That's another thing that hurt the black community.
Yeah.
Black folk won't speak, and it just tears me up. But you don't have that problem.
I don't have that problem. I've never had that problem.
Right.
Now, here's a request. Miss Edie Avery wants a copy of the video that was done by Reverend Avery when we were down at Mount Hope. Do you remember the occasion?
It's all on YouTube. It's all over YouTube.
I need to
all
know.
she have to download it, upload it, or I'll send it to her.
Okay. Will you please help me? You remember he did all of the speaking.
They lied on the stand. They lied. The Secretary of State lied on the stand.
That's right.
Mr. Boone lied on the stand.
Will you please help me help her
Yeah.
get a copy
Yeah.
of that document?
I thought she had one. That'd be
She doesn't
easy.
have.
That's easy. I get it for her.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
And thank you. God bless.
Peace. Thank you so much.
I wonder who will wake him, bring him to his feet. Speak now, or forever hold your peace. I wonder who will wake him, bring him to his feet. Speak now, or forever hold your peace. There's a lion where he's in Judah sleep. I wonder who will wake him, bring him to his feet. Speak now, or forever hold your peace. The violence of this beast must cease. There's a lion in Judah. I wonder who will